Chapter 17, A Smuggler. The final word, Carla cried out, is China. What does it mean? Nancy asked quickly. Carla said that in Spanish it stood for many things. Chinese, China, porcelain. It even means pebbles. Pebbles, Nancy repeated. She looked off into the distance and then said, perhaps we should look for a mesa of pebbles. With a monkey's tail on it, George added, grinning. The others laughed. Then there was a prolonged silence as the girls tried to figure out in which sense Aguilar had used China. Did the mesa have Chinese living on it? Or was it perhaps a spot where porcelain was made? Suddenly, the old Indian said something to Mapani. The guide in turn became excited, and the two men talked at a rapid rate. The girls looked at one another, puzzled, but presently Mapani turned to them and said, I think Panzatimba has solved your mystery for you. Have you ever heard of the Nazcan lines? Carla spoke up. I have heard of them, but I really don't know anything about the place. Mapani explained. About 200 miles south of Lima, there is a desert, a pebbly mesa 1,200 feet above sea level and 50 miles from the ocean. In ancient times, and no one knows how long ago, people there scratched giant figures into the earth. These designs can still be seen and are named for the Nazcan people whose pottery was found nearby. I have never been to the Nazcan site, but I have been told that from a plane you can see everything. There are lines like on your plaque and figures of many things, including monkeys. Nancy was so excited, she felt as if her heart had suddenly stopped beating. That's it, she exclaimed. Oh, this is simply marvelous. How can we ever thank Panzatimba for giving us this clue? Mapani translated the message to Panzatimba, who merely smiled and shook his head. He wanted them to know he was a very religious and philosophical man who never took earthly rewards for helping people. Bess's eyes suddenly became dewy, and she murmured, It is a privilege to meet such a person. When this was translated to Panzatimba, he looked embarrassed and turned to leave. Wait, said Nancy, and invited Panzatimba to eat with them. He shook his head, and Mapani smilingly said that the old Indian was too shy to go into the dining room. He was not used to eating in this fashion, and also he did not like the kind of food they served. I'm sorry, Nancy said. Before he goes, I would like to know something. Panzatimba seems to have remarkable eyesight. Even at his age, he was able to read things on the plaque which we could not see through a magnifying glass. I can answer that, Mapani replied. Many Inca Indians in these mountains have inherited amazing sight. Panzatimba can see tiny things at close range and spot small objects and read signs 2/3 of a mile away. The girls were astounded to hear this, and George said, I'd like a demonstration. They walked outside with Panzatimba, and Mapani said something to him in Quechua. At once, Panzatimba looked far off. Then he spoke to Mapani, who translated. Our friend sees a condor seated on top of a tree. I cannot see it. Can you? He pointed down toward the river. All the girls confessed they could not see anything but dense growth. A few moments later, Panzatimba proved to be right. A huge condor rose into the air and winged its way up the mountainside. That's fantastic, Bess burst out. Oh, what I wouldn't give to have sight like that! Mapani translated, and Panzatimba smiled. Then he turned once more to leave. Nancy called out, Kuti mune ki kama! Panzatimba turned around and gave her a big smile for saying goodbye to him in his language and repeated the phrase. The girls were ready early the next morning to leave Machu Picchu. During the ride back to Lima, first by train to Cuzco, then by plane, they felt it best not to talk about the mystery in public. Each girl kept a sharp lookout for Luis Losa, but did not see him. "Are you going to call the police as soon as we get to the Ponce home?" George asked Nancy. She shook her head. "The first thing I want to do is go to Senor Jorge Velez's shop with the file. We must find out definitely if it belongs to him and also whether he has heard from his assistant." As soon as the plane landed in Lima, the girls said goodbye to Mapani and paid him for his excellent services. He had traveled all the way with them to do some shopping in the city. Carla hailed a taxi and gave the address of the craft shop. Senor Velez expressed delight at seeing the girls again, but his face clouded when they told him of their adventures and suspicions. He identified the file at once and said Luis Losa had not reported for work, nor had he ever communicated with the shop. "Senor Velez," said Nancy, "you have already told us that nothing seemed to be missing except tools, but have you looked in your workbenches and desks to see if any other articles are missing?" The shop owner admitted he had not. He headed first for the spot where Luis Losa had worked. The girls followed him to the back room and watched as he pulled open first one drawer, then another of the table that stood against an inner wall. A strange look came over Senor Velez's face. "Every drawing of mine he was using is gone," he reported. "Apparently Luis took them all." Nancy's sharp eyes had detected an unusual back panel in one of the drawers. She asked the shop owner if he would mind if she investigated it. "No, indeed. Go ahead." Nancy pulled the drawer all the way out and set it on top of the workbench. It was quite evident that the space in this drawer was less than in that of similar ones. At the back, a large section of wood had been nailed in, as if to reinforce the drawer. Suspicious, Nancy asked Senor Velez for the file which they had brought. When he handed it to her, she wedged the file alongside the extra piece of wood and pried it forward. A moment later, the section, which was hollow, pulled free. Underneath lay several letters. Nancy picked up one of the envelopes and saw that it was addressed to Luis Losa, evidently at his home in Lima. "Look!" she exclaimed, pointing to the sender's name and address in the upper left-hand corner. "Harry Wallace!" Carla cried out. "The importer who tried to take the plaque from your home, Nancy!" As George told the story to the shop owner, Nancy pulled out one of the letters and unfolded it. The others crowded around her to read it and expressed astonishment at the contents. The salutation was, "Dear El Gato," and the letter stated that the shipment had arrived okay and a check was enclosed. The note ended with praise for El Gato's cleverness in handling the order. Nancy turned to Senor Velez. "Did you know Luis Losa's nickname was El Gato?" "I certainly did not," the man replied. "He's on the police wanted list," Nancy said. "I shall call headquarters at once," declared Senor Velez. While he went off to do this, Nancy examined every drawer in Luis Losa's workbench for additional secret compartments. "Maybe we can find out what he was shipping." The other girls helped her pull out the drawers and set them on top of the workbench. Each was examined thoroughly. Nancy noticed that the bottom of one was thicker than that of the others. "Maybe this means something," she said. Again using the file, she managed to pry up part of the wooden bottom and found that there was another beneath it. Between the two pieces of wood lay a matching salad fork and spoon. "They are made of Araucanian wood," Bess remarked. "And I'll bet the handles are hollow," George added. Nancy was already experimenting to see if she could unscrew one of the handles. She did so with little effort. Peering inside, the girls could see a quantity of fine white powder. Just then, 2 police officers arrived, and Senor Velez led them into the workroom. He introduced the girls and explained their part in solving the mystery. Nancy held up the spoon handle and showed it to the officers. "I believe El Gato is a smuggler," she said. One of the officers took the wooden implement and smelled the contents. "I am not sure what this is," he said. "I will take it to the police laboratory for analysis." He had barely finished speaking when George happened to glance toward an open window. She saw a head rising up over the sill. Then she recognized the face of Luis Losa. Before George could cry out, his hand came up and he hurled a bomb with a lighted fuse into the workroom. "On the floor, everybody!" George screamed. Instantly, the whole group dived and lay still. The bomb hit Losa's workbench and exploded. Bits of shattered wood, pots of varnish, and cans of paint flew in all directions. Everyone in the room was pelted with debris. As soon as things quieted down, Nancy and the others cautiously got to their feet. Velez, excited, began to speak half in Spanish and half in English. George pointed to the window and said, "Luis Losa threw the bomb." The two officers dashed from the room and the others heard the shop door slam. "Did anyone get hurt?" Nancy asked. Fortunately, the homemade bomb had not been a powerful one, and its victims in the workroom had suffered only minor cuts and bruises. Bess, however, was on the verge of hysterics. "Nancy, that bomb was aimed right in your direction. If you hadn't ducked, it would have hit you. Oh, Nancy, you might have been killed." Nancy was pretty sober herself. She doubted that the bomb could have killed her, but Luis Losa certainly intended that it do a good bit of damage. She decided that he had hoped to destroy all the evidence against him. Losa must have followed us from the airport and had the bomb with him. "Oh, I hope the police catch him," Carla said nervously. "None of us is safe while he is at large." She told Senor Velez the whole story of the cat warning she had received and the red cat face painted on the rock at Sacsayhuaman. "It is a dreadful business," the craftsman said. He picked up the spoon handle which the officer had laid down. "I wonder what this white powder is." He sprinkled a small quantity into the palm of his hand, raised it to his mouth, and stuck out his tongue to test it. "Oh, please don't do that," Nancy advised hurriedly. "This powder may be poison." End of chapter 17.